10 years is a long time to have been doing anything, let alone playing a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. But 10 years to the day is the anniversary of one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most influential and notorious decks ever created. A lot of you watching right now may only really know Burning Abyss as that weird legacy deck that one streamer guy occasionally talks about. Some of you around long enough on my channel may remember the original Legacy of the Burning Abyss video I posted 7 years ago. Well, here it is again, polished, remastered, but most importantly of all, updated to celebrate today the 10-year anniversary of the release of Burning Abyss. Burning Abyss is one of the greatest and most innovative archetypes ever printed. Regardless of what you think about the deck, it is one of the longest reigning meta decks historically, taking on multiple different shapes and forms over the course of its dominance, as well as during its stint as a rogue deck. Burning Abyss is an archetype with 11 main deck monsters, a ritual monster, a ritual spell, a fusion spell, 2 trap cards, and 4.5 extra deck monsters. The gimmick of Burning Abyss is a rank 3 deck with parallel effects across the entire main deck. Each Mala branch of the Burning Abyss is able to special summon itself from the hand for free, providing you do not control any spells and traps. Most Burning Abyss monsters also have a graveyard effect that trigger even when discarded or sent as a cost. Given the power level of 2014, each effect was once per turn, meaning you couldn't just spam the field with 4 names, send them all into the graveyard by detaching off of Xyz and triggering them again. Despite this massive and really heavy restriction by 2024 standards, that was absolutely fine and not really a huge weakness 10 years ago. Backed up with some staple trap cards that have graveyard synergies like Karma Cutter Windblast, Burning Abyss has usually been a control deck, relying on a decently strong boss monster protected with back row or hand traps. Leading up to the inaugural set, Duelist Alliance, it was seen by many to be the major upscale of power creep in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time. You see, this was basically the power of the elements of 2014, because at the time, we were going from setting a glorified man-eater bug in the form of Firehand to fusing from our main deck and going +5. Now, the majority of the community were fixated on Shaddolls, and even some people were on Yangzing because Chinese dragons are really cool, and it was the introduction of the worm type. Long story short, that wasn't going to contend with 3 Shaddol fusion, soul charge, and super polymerization. Shaddol was poised to be a tier 0 threat and a dominant deck for the new age of Yu-Gi-Oh! So in the lead up to Duelist Alliance, not many eyes were on Burning Abyss for competitive viability, other than their cool lore and artwork. The deck didn't really seem to offer much on paper. Summon a 2500 beater and then set a Wing Blast? What is this, 2004? On the other hand, some people were pretty hyped about being able to search Tour Guide from the Underworld, one of the most iconic competitive Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and later the face of Duel Links. But in the end phase, there's no way that this was going to be a viable deck, surely. While this era was the social media uptick for Yu-Gi-Oh's presence online, there wasn't that much crossover into the OCG metagame. We had some knowledge of what was going on over there, and needless to say, that focus again was all on Shaddol. Shaddol Winda was like a looming monster under the bed for TCG players. An indestructible monster that only let you summon once per turn effectively was going to kill off almost every competitive deck at the time by herself. No Moral Attack, no Firehand, and without any ideas to Burning Abyss's viability for the matchup since this was a TCG exclusive deck. It meant that there was no frame of reference for how good Burning Abyss could actually be. And so, the meta for late 2014 was predicted to be basically Shaddol versus everything else, like In Denial Hat players that finally managed to get a playset of Artifact Sanctums. And by the way, nobody was summoning Scythe 10 years ago.
Chapter 1, Duelist Alliance, August 14th, 2014.
Duelist Alliance saw the release of the bread and butter cards of Burning Abyss and arguably still today, their most powerful grassroots monsters. Dante himself is one of the greatest Xyz monsters ever printed and potentially the most summoned, although nowadays that might be second place after Zeus. It had a huge amount of defense. It floated, it could beat over most relevant cards in the format, and it could still use its effect while negated by things like Effect Veiler or Skill Drain. It's not an exaggeration to say that the original 3 Burning Abyss monsters are still, from wave number 1, perhaps the best Burning Abyss cards. Graf summons any Burning Abyss from deck, Seer summons any Burning Abyss from the graveyard, including correctly summoned extra deck monsters, and Skarm searches any level 3 Dark Fiend from the deck during the end phase. And that includes Tour Guide from the Underworld, an honorary Burning Abyss monster. The very early playtesting for Burning Abyss was quite limited. Activate Supply Squad, summon Mathematician, send a Graf, special summon Skarm, which destroys itself, letting you draw a card, set a Wing Blast, and then get Tour Guide and pass, was about as explosive of a play as the deck had. And that's if you wanted to play something like Supply Squad, which saw some popularity. There were a few options, like lots of discard traps, Karma Cut, Wind Blast, Divine Wrath, naturally with the nature of graveyard effects, Mathematicians with a Shaddoll Dragon, just to hit back row, and rank up magic Astral Force, because you could make Dante into Constellar Pallades, never of course being able to summon a Burning Abyss monster again, since all the Burning Abyss monsters have the Xenolock of immediately destroying themselves if another non-Burning Abyss monster is on the field. Astral Force was a pretty big part of the early Burning Abyss deck building, as you could use it with the infamous Seer Dante loop, of always having him return to the field, and then bring back the Seer to your hand, to keep it ad infinitum. Meaning, with an endless supply of Dantes, and with the cost of skipping your draw phase, well, you could make Constellar Pallades every turn as it was a light warrior, like Dante, resummon the Dante with Seer after it destroys itself, and then in main phase 2 you could get yourself a Downward Magician. And if at some point you had a spare Skarm, you could also get Tour Guide for the following turn, since you didn't need the draw phase. So surprisingly, it was a decent amount of field presence and tempo for that era, especially since you could just mill the Astral Force, you didn't need to draw it. Now, the first major events for Duelist Alliance were YCS Madrid and YCS Toronto, both on the same weekend. Burning Abyss achieved moderate success at these events as a kind of hyped up stun deck, but was obviously outshined in performance by the insane combo plays that Shaddoll offered. It wasn't that Burning Abyss was bad right now, it's just that Chaos Shaddolls with a Lightsworn engine, triple Soul Charge, triple Super Poly was really ridiculous. Now, a major landmark accomplishment for Burning Abyss at YCS Madrid was a deck called Shabis, because if you can't beat them, then join them. There was a top 8 finish for the deck, playing and utilizing both archetypes of Shaddoll and Burning Abyss, running Curry Bandit and Beginning of the End to turbo through the deck and trigger multiple graveyard effects. This was kind of a milestone in Burning Abyss deck building, for the deck would go on to be combined and mixed with so many different archetypes for years to come. Burning Abyss also won an ARG championship in September with a smooth 20-20 ratio, and this was the era of ARG championships being relevant, competitive events that players would look to for new techs and innovations. This list was playing things like the Shaddoll Dragon to send with Mathematician, Trap Stun for the Mirror, and Satella Knights, with Mind Crush, and even a Ryza the Storm Monarch. And then the ban list came. On October 1st, 2014, it limited Soul Charge, Raigeki, and Super Polymerization. This severely crippled Shaddolls and leveled the playing field for Burning Abyss. And so, we had the legendary Billy Break to save us and come up with a strategy to fix and define the meta for us at the forthcoming YCS Dallas in that same month. How do we make our decks consistent and still powerful post-ban list? Well, apparently the best way to break the meta is to play every card in said meta. Billy's 60-card YCS Dallas list is an extension of Shabis, but with more traps and a whole artifact engine, while taking advantage of the versatility of cards like Mathematician, being able to trigger basically anything printed in Duelist Alliance. In hindsight, looking back at it now, Billy Break might have been the first person to play a pile deck like this, especially since the mantra at the time was 40 cards is the best. What kind of looks like a somewhat normal deck in principle for 2024, meaning running over significantly 40 cards, and mashing multiple engines together and archetypes that have just a little thread of overlap. I mean, you are kind of looking at something like a Hulk Punk pile, for example, from 22, but just 8 years prior.
Chapter 2. The New Challengers, November 6, 2014.
New Challengers was a booster pack that contained fairly underwhelming support for the deck, at least when you compared it to the original Graf, Skarm, and Seer. Alich, the best one, who could be used for negating Flying Sea, a very powerful anti-BA card, or detached from equipped Danganir to act as a kind of Walmart Veiler, and Calcab, which was pretty much just an extra name. And during this time, we also saw the introduction of the tuner monster Rubik, which had very funny misinformation leaks at the time, and of course Virgil, an underappreciated boss monster that could be brought back with Seer. For the rest of the meta, notable cards released were those such as Shaddoll Hound. Now let me tell you, when you've just lost multiple soul charges and super polymerizations, Shaddoll Hound feels bad as a Shaddoll player. It was an insultingly terrible card that I don't even remember what it does, and nor do I think it's ever been played in a deck. However, Shaddoll did get El Shaddoll fusion, which means they were now able to dodge Karma Cut during the battle phase and make another construct. A quick play fusion spell, more fusion spells, to further trigger all of the materials and advance the game state. Satellanites also got a new monster whose main effect was the antithesis of Burning Abyss and Shaddoll, non-destructive removal with Triver. So you were now basically forced to make lots of Downer Magicians with Seers and Dantes as your materials, or your deck would be simply bounced away. By having Dantes as material, you would simply get to add everything back and then summon all of your Burning Abyss monsters again next turn. It also had the effect where it would discard one card from your hand, but in the format of Shaddoll and BA, that was not a very clever idea. A new archetype also came into the fray, Cliffort. Cliffort would become the Achilles heel of Shaddoll, while at the same time being a fairly balanced to very favorable matchup for Burning Abyss, depending on how quickly you came to realize that Fire Lake of the Burning Abyss was one of the most broken cards of the format. A trap which tributes 2 Burning Abyss monsters, triggering their effects, and then destroys 3 cards on the field. Very strong against the Pendulum deck with Scales, Skill Drain, and multiple different floodgates like Rivalry of Warlords or Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. And so the last relevant card to mention from new challenges was Denko Sekka.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Yeah, Denko Sekka. If you haven't experienced the pure terror and fear of when your opponent asks if they can enter the main phase knowing that they're playing Shaddoll while you have a Dante in 3 back row, one of which cannot answer the Denko, then good for you, because that was a very scary time to be setting back row. The first big event of new challenges was ARG Raleigh. Patrick Hoban went on to win this event and then win the YCS Anaheim 2 weeks later with basically the same deck, maining enemy controller so that you could OTK your opponent using their own constructs, or take your opponent's Dantes to rank up into Downed Magicians. You see, now that Burning Abyss was gaining some popularity, the mirror match became quite common, and so outing a 25 floating defender with a 25 beater is, well, that's gonna cause a grind game. The only way to remove your opponent's Dantes with pure engine was to make your own Dante, not use the effect, rank up into Downward in main phase 2 and then attack over it the next turn. Or there was also Virgil, but resolving Virgil into 3 back row was gonna be a bit of an issue. So a lot of early Burning Abyss mirror matches did kind of result in a staring contest for who could top deck non-engines like Karma Cut first. Now this was while most of us were still playing Burning Abyss as if it was a stun deck, in a format with 3 El Shaddoll Fusion and 3 Denko Sekka. This was one of the reasons why Patrick Hoban was seen as one of the greatest players at the time. Format after format up until this point, throughout the Hat era, he would be the one pioneering and leading the way for creativity, for breaking the format. Patrick Hoban revolutionized the way Burning Abyss was played, because while everyone looked at Rubik and saw it as just nothing more than a vanilla tuner that you could maybe play as a one-of to access Virgil, Patrick Hoban realized that Rubik and the others were essentially free monsters that you could summon to make more Dantes. Similarly, like Calcap, while it was kinda just terrible, it was still a Burning Abyss monster. They could all be spammed onto the field to make more Dantes, mill 3, and then try and hit the good ones like Graf and Seer to then make more Dantes or hit Scarm and get Tour Guide for next turn. So, having multiple Dantes to blow away with Fire Lake was absolutely ludicrous against Cliffort, and so that was essentially the whole of new challengers, the infamous triangle and rock, paper, scissors format. On paper, it was Burning Abyss, which beats Cliffort, which beats Shaddoll, which should beat Burning Abyss, with Satellanite kind of on the fringes. In hindsight, Burning Abyss was definitely the better of the 3, completely shitting on Cliffort and being fairly balanced against Shaddoll, because while Shaddoll was extremely powerful and easily the highest ceiling deck of the format, it was a fusion deck, and a fusion deck that does not draw a fusion spell, well, you've all seen branded. Consistently summoning 2 level 3s was just statistically going to happen more often than drawing a fusion spell, Light Monster, and Shaddoll, with the 4th card being Denko Sekka as a bonus. It just couldn't compare in terms of consistency.
Chapter 3, Secrets of Eternity, January 15th, 2015.
Konami finally limited Moral Attack about 3 formats too late. Yeah, really, they thought that that was the problem going into 2015. Just as a fun piece of trivia for those of you watching this back in 2024, yeah, nothing's changed. Remember when the Wind Barrier statue was banned way after Flu's peak? Yeah, this has been happening for a while. Internet Explorer ban lists. Super Poly also got banned, and for some reason Snatch Steal came back for literally one format, only before getting immediately banned in the next. One of the earliest examples of a whoops that I can remember for ban lists. 2 weeks later, Secrets of Eternity was released. This included more names to spam onto the field, and an actual good main deck monster that wasn't just there as Dante and discard fodder. That was yours truly, Farfa. This gave Burning Abyss a reliable and consistent way to deal with Winda. And now, Burning Abyss got Good and Evil, a card which lets you discard things like Graph and Seer to search Fire Lake from your deck. It also lets you ritual summon the newly released Malakoda, but that is genuinely not worth talking about, so we're going to move on from that. This was also the set that had Kagna, which allowed you to send Good and Evil from deck to the grave, and probably the most important one of in the deck, Libich. Libich's effect meant that you know how to way to summon Burning Abyss monsters to the field without them blowing themselves up like with Mathematician. In order to balance this solid support, Konami then gave Cliffort Stealth, an unrespondable semi-sort of towers, and a card that lets you draw for everything that you tributed that turn, Cliffort Monolith. Satellarknight got Satellarknight Constellar Diamond, a card that if you read closely on the original effect text says absolutely shit on Burning Abyss and Shaddoll. This card negates and destroys dark monsters and prevents sending from deck to the grave, and banishes cards returned from grave to hand. If you've read Shaddoll, Fusion, and Dante, you can see what they were trying to do with Constellar Diamond. So all of the relevant meta decks got really good new juicy support. Oh, except for Shaddoll, they did also get a card. They got Shaddoll Wendigo, a card which nobody in the history of this game has ever played in a deck list, except in a Subterror Remote Duel Extravaganza list in the extra deck. And nobody really knew why. Let's move on. Burning Abyss were now pretty much above the triangle, and about a mile ahead of the competition. Even despite the best efforts of Satellarknight, the consistency of summoning any 2 level 3s, milling 3 for cost, and generating the advantage in tempo for free was simply too much for the other decks to deal with. Even with Cliffort's and Shaddoll's higher ceilings, Burning Abyss was just far too good at dealing with problems with fewer cards while also floating in the process whenever the cards hit the graveyard. And all of this culminated at YCS Charleston 2015. Apart from that crazy dude winning Swiss with Volcanics, the representation of Burning Abyss in Top Cut was almost 2/3 of the meta alongside Cliffort and a few Shaddoll. This was peak Burning Abyss at full power, with Fire Lakes, Econs, lots of names to spam the board with, and Farfa to deal with problem cards. These numbers are bigger than Snake Eye today, to give you some context for how dominant Burning Abyss was.
Chapter 4, The Secret Forces, February 12th, 2015.
It must suck being a deck during the period in time where Konami releases 2 back-to-back archetypes that arguably rival the power of Dragon Rulers. Yeah, it's 2015, so the barometer for power creep in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is still Dragon Ruler. From this set, never again would Burning Abyss see anything like the dominance and its power that it had at YCS Charleston before the release of Secret Forces. Nothing will come close to that performance for Burning Abyss, so in terms of raw numbers, this kind of was the peak. With the introduction of Necros, everything about the entire Burning Abyss archetype was directly countered. Unicorn stops you from beating over anything and using most of your extra deck. Bryanak was non-destructive removal. Trishula was also non-destructive removal that could also break the Seer Dante loop. Valkyra stopped OTKs, and the deck very easily made Abyss Dweller. Everything good and strong that Burning Abyss had to offer was directly countered with the release of Necros. At YCS Tacoma in February 2015, the first major event of the Secret Forces, 22 of 32 top cut spots were all Necros. Now, Burning Abyss, however, did somehow take 4 top cut spots. But as you can see, the deck went from almost tier 0 to a complete anti-meta rogue deck overnight. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. And this was out the ban list. At YCS Prague, however, nothing really changed. Necros was still... Oh, what's that? Oh, yes, and that's right. You better get used to this, because this is going to happen a lot. For some reason, Burning Abyss managed to win a YCS in Necros format. A crazy French duelist called Valens Latoute managed to Raigeki break and wind blast his way to a win of a YCS format against the field of the most powerful deck ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh! By this point in time. Heroes Strike, a structure deck centered around, you guessed it, heroes, was released a month prior, but nobody really gave it much attention, other than budget and hero players, of course. Mask Change 2 was a new card that could easily let you make Dark Law in Burning Abyss. And it seems that Dark Law did play a huge role in toppling Necros by banishing key combo pieces from their hand that they would search out, while also keeping the graveyard banished. Nevertheless, this short-lived success can truthfully be relegated to an anomaly. After YCS Prague, Necros won the rest of the YCSs and major events during this half of the year until National season. In April of 2015, all of the major Duels Alliance decks got a hit on the ban list. Clifforts lost some consistency with a Scout and 2 Sacrifice going to 1, but most importantly, 4 of their 6 main decked copies of Emptiness and Skill Drain were hit, making it an even easier matchup for Burning Abyss. The Snatch Steal Boo Boo was fixed, and Burning Abyss lost the best normal summon ever printed down to just a single copy of Tour Guide from the Underworld. Somehow, Shaddoll managed to evade this ban list. I suppose that must have been Konami's way of saying sorry for printing Shaddoll, Hound, and Wendigo. Oh, and Gladbeast Bestiari went from 1 to 3. Finally, Gladbeast format. Konami decided to give Necros a gentle hit of Preparation of Rites to 1 and Bryanak to 2. A little consistency hit and nothing more, since it was basically just released. While the best deck in the game lost pretty much nothing, they still got to keep Jin, Releaser of Rituals, a searchable card which could stop your opponent from special summoning by sending it to the graveyard with Lavaval Chain. Yeah, that card was still legal. So, no longer was the combo-based style of Burning Abyss viable. It had to resort to going back to becoming a trap deck that would have to grind its way out of the Jin lock, while also somehow not getting Dweller Bryanak. Oh, and did I mention Denko Sekka could be played in Necros?
Chapter 5, Cross Souls, May 14th, 2015.
This set saw the release of Dante, Pilgrim of the Burning Abyss, which was garbage and unplayable, along with Terminus, a 3-material fusion spell with no cheating effects like a Miracle Fusion, and, did I mention, it required 3 materials, just to lose to a Trishula, because while it couldn't be targeted, Trishula didn't care. On the plus side, Burning Abyss had the most villainous card ever printed, Barbar. Barbar for game would become the default meme way to lose in a duel from this point onwards. Burning Abyss could summon Nightmare Shark, and then Barbar their way into a win in time for 2,900 damage, rather than trying to actually interact with and outskill their opponent. You know, it's really funny writing this 10 years later. Some things never change. This was also around the era where the competitive viability of Cliffort Towers really picked up. Previously, Cliffort was just a floodgate deck that kind of thrived in having lots of big monsters, and when I say big, they were kind of small, but because of skill drain, they would be boosted to their original attack. So, sacrificing all 3 of them for a towers wasn't really worth it up until now. But with all of their consistency hits, and I could say consistency mostly to the floodgates, sitting on a towers was a pretty good strategy, especially in Europe where we didn't have Diamond Crab King, a promo which was only available in North America. And because of this, Burning Abyss players even tried side decking that old school Astral Force and a Heraldry Crest to beat over the towers. We had no Kaijus, we didn't have Herald of the Abyss, not like you kids today with your plethora of board breakers. Though this was 2015. You had to really work to out a boss monster, especially the original Apocryphort Towers. For the time being, the support was fairly underwhelming, since more names provides diminishing returns. It wasn't really what Burning Abyss needed anymore. After already having 9 Mala branches before this, they needed more utility to deal with Necros, on the power level of the original Seer, Graph, and Skarm, especially now that Tour Guide had been limited. But other than Burning Abyss cards, they did get Fiend Griefing, a normal trap card that was able to severely disrupt cards like Necros Cycle or Necros Mirror by forcing them to tribute things they didn't want to for a ritual summon because you're shuffling away Shuret, while also advancing your own game state by sending things like Absolute King Backjack, or sending Skarm, or more disruption by sending Farfa. The card was fine, but it wasn't really enough to make Burning Abyss the amazing contender that it was from days gone. In the lead up to National Season, Burning Abyss would remain a generic anti-Necroz stun deck, but in late June of 2015, a Downward Magician Turbo deck claimed victory of ARG Edison. The idea behind this deck was that they wanted to go second and put up a huge board of multiple Dantes to rank up into Downward Magician, and then activate the secret village of the Spellcasters, which would mean that Necroz would have no way to be able to conduct a ritual summon. A ritual deck without spells is pretty useless. And so it was kind of consistent, because remember, this was a period in time where terraforming was at 3. It was probably the most unique inception of Burning Abyss since its peak very early in the year, and I think this highlights how Burning Abyss managed to shift, change, and adapt depending on what was happening around it. A pattern that would no doubt last for years to come as it tries to hold on to meta viability. During the national season, after winning basically every single YCS and most of its top cut spots in the year so far, Necroz failed to take either the European or the North American WCQ. In America, the finals was a Burning Abyss mirror match in Necroz format. It was, at the time, one of the most baffling and ridiculous glitches in the Matrix for Necroz of all decks to somehow not win even one national. And while Burning Abyss essentially did have to be played like a Floodgate anti-meta deck, it does kind of give credence to just how adaptable and versatile the cards were, and maybe using a Floodgate or two. To round off national season, we did get the July 2015 ban list, which saw the banning of Lavaval Chain and Jin, and also the limitation of Shuret. Burning Abyss and Shaddoll did not take any hits whatsoever, and so it would look like they were going to survive for another set.
Chapter 6, Clash of Rebellions, August 6th, 2015.
1 year after the release of Duelist Alliance, Burning Abyss and Shaddoll were still viable despite Necroz. Clash of Rebellions was a tough set for Burning Abyss. They had already finished their journey through the Devil May Cry franchise. Wait, hold on, let me use the original name. They had already finished their journey through Dante Alighieri's Dante's Inferno in the last booster pack, so anything in Clash of Rebellions had to be cards that were similar to Fiend Griefing, non-archetypal support that would directly benefit the deck. Unfortunately, the powerful new Clown cards did quite the opposite. They simply boosted the power of Burning Abyss's competition, Shaddoll and Necroz. It gave their decks more powerful light monsters and rank 4 plays. And you know what rank 4 plays means. More Abyss Dwellers. A card that has been complained about and lauded as unreasonable even as recently as last year. Some things really do never change. Regardless, for the first major YCS of the new set at YCN's Toronto, Gabriel Orizenvine took first place with Burning Abyss. I told you to get used to this, didn't I? Yep, this shit was still not only topping, but winning events despite its arch nemesis, Shaddoll's, getting some very, very sick clown support, and Necroz still being pretty powerful despite the second ban list, and also utilizing the new clowns. Now, the decks were still trying to replicate the success of Noah Green at the North American WCQ by relying on the synergies of the same old kind of trap cards. The following month in the Megatons, Necroz and Shaddoll now got to play around with instant fusion with the release of Norden, a 1-card rank 4 that could bring back clowns for more Abyss Dwellers. After the release of Norden, the next major event was YCS Dallas in October 2015. The winner of this event was somehow Infernoids by Eric Christensen. Yes, in a format where Shaddolls were as close as they would ever be to full power, Necroz and Burning Abyss having snowball success, Infernoid won the event. I don't think Eric himself knows how he managed to win an event in that format with Infernoids, but that's Yu-Gi-Oh! Taking the natural inherent graveyard disruption that Infernoids provide, perhaps it was finally time for an anti-meta deck of sorts to shine, since a quick play DD Crow was powerful against all 3 of the decks. But still, surprisingly at YCS Dallas, there was a very mixed meta of Shaddolls, Necroz, BA, and we even saw some pure clowns. Notable Burning Abyss pilots like Ediception and Cody Angeloff managed to take more spots than Shaddolls, a total of 6 despite the clown support and Norden. In hindsight, it really is bizarre that something as absurd as Norden was not somehow carrying every non-Burning Abyss deck to victory. Again, the issue is that while as good as Shaddoll is and as high of a ceiling and as crazy of a combo it could do, you still need to draw Light Monster, Fusion Spell, Shaddoll. That's just a 3-card combo you need to draw every hand. That's just going to happen less often than 2 level 3s. Now, a final thing to mention here on the same weekend was the release of Speedroid Terror Top, also known as Terror Top Auto Top, which would become a staple in the deck for the future. However, for this event, surprisingly none of the recorded Burning Abyss tops played this engine. People were most likely too afraid of having your Terror Top be negated, and then because of the Burning Abyss Xenolock, essentially have no follow-up.
Chapter 7, Dimension of Chaos, November 5th, 2015.
The November 2015 ban list is one of the most severe and drastic lists ever. Necros lost Shuret, and arguably Exciton Knight as well, since the deck was very much in tune was using the rank 4 toolbox. Bryonak and Unicore were also limited, and Rota was also limited. Shaddoll's lost El Shaddol Construct, the heart and soul of its deck. They even had El Shaddol Fusion limited to 1. Clifforts also had Apocalyphort Towers banned. Now, Burning Abyss did not go without casualties either, with Seer being limited to 2 and Graph being limited to 1. But while the other decks were completely killed off, Seer to 2 and Graph to 1 just meant that the deck could no longer rely on milling consistently well as a strategy. And so as long as Graph remained at 1, there would always be a powerful target for Tour Guide from the Underworld, and as long as Seer remained at 1, Dante could always be brought back. So while on paper it was a severe ban list for Burning Abyss, the deck would be very playable for another year. The November 2015 ban list was so pivotal and monumental for the whole of Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. Not only did it permanently annihilate Necros, it was the ban list that effectively saw the end of the original triangle between Cliffort, Shaddol, and Burning Abyss. The decks had changed their structures over the course of their support, but the rivalry between the big three was always there throughout all of the different sets, formats, and ban lists that shaped and changed them throughout this whole period. While Dante got to survive and live on from November 2015, the original rivalry of Burning Abyss and Shaddol would never be what it once was ever again with the banning of Construct. The bond that Shaddol's and Burning Abyss shared was now gone forever. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Yankees, Red Sox, Argentina, Brazil. It was just iconic how much these decks meant to each other's communities. While nothing could ever replace Shaddol as the arch nemesis, we would get something that was almost as frustrating as Winda. Dimension of Chaos saw the inception of Cosmo Dark Destroyer. Cosmo Dark Destroyer was the bane of many decks, particularly decks that rely on beating over things smaller than 2500, or at least being able to target them. Dark Destroyer did neither, and it floated into another untargetable floater bigger than 2500. Cosmo Dark Destroyer was an almost format warping card. You see, this was 2015, 9 years ago. 9 years prior to the release of Daruma Cannon, Boral Sword, Underworld Goddess, an untargetable 3k monster was just relentless because it summoned more Cosmos and destroyed your field in the process. Cosmo would become a relatively popular contender at some point throughout the coming season. As the events came in one after the other, Burning Abyss was in a sort of drought. The deck was effectively off the radar with Dark Destroyer and also Magispector Kirin, a card that cannot be destroyed or targeted and constantly returns with each Pendulum summon. If you thought Stealth and Construct were worthy rivals, well, Burning Abyss now had to deal with Kirin and Dark Destroyer in the same format. And remember, this was pre-Master Rule 4. This is full power Pendulum. This is Soul Charge for 5 every turn. And somehow miraculously, if you got through the compulsory evacuation device that is Kirin on Dante by making a second Dante to attack over it, well, next turn they summon it right back for free at no cost, and as long as they have 2 scales on the field. And with 4 other monsters from the extra deck. Every single turn. There's a reason Pendulum was just ripped apart as a mechanic years later. But just when you thought you could write Dante off because of some dumb Darth Vader spaceship wannabe Death Star that loses to System Down, Burning Abyss did get 2 tops at YCS San Jose after Dimension of Chaos went live. Piloted by Alex Juneja and Norberto Leon, both of their deck lists were extremely similar and played over 20 trap cards, with 3 Traveler of the Burning Abyss. Finally, that card was seeing play, and even Firelake again. Must have dodged a lot of Cosmo matchups for that one, by the way.
Chapter 8, Breakers of Shadow, January 14th, 2016.
In January 2016, Breaker of Shadows brought about Pepe, the strongest deck in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think I've said that every single year in this video, haven't I? Yu-Gi-Oh's power creep really should be studied. Monarchs were now part of the meta with the release of the Emperor of Darkness structure deck. This was also the set where Burning Abyss received their first indirect support card in a long time, Fiendish Rhino Warrior. Fiendish Rhino Warrior now allowed you to not auto-scoop to Ojama Trio, and it gave your deck more versatility and consistency. But while Fiendish Rhino Warrior was a genuinely good card, it was obviously incomparable at the time to full power Pepe. Not only did Burning Abyss have to deal with Cosmo Dark Destroyer, it had to deal with its ridiculous Pendulum deck, and further than that, Stormforth Erebus, which had a searchable Vanity's Emptiness in the form of Domain of the True Monarchs. But you see, not all hope was lost. While BA was completely relegated to being a rogue deck, temporarily, in February 2016, Wing Raiders dropped a whole new archetype called Phantom Knights. Phantom Knights would later become incredibly incremental to the deck's strategy. While many people debated whether or not they were worth playing, as they were just quite lackluster in the hand to draw, and with Allure of Darkness only at 1 copy, they didn't really seem reliable in the hands of Burning Abyss because of the important Xenolock. As you can expect, the deck did basically nothing in full power Pepe format, aside from a few regional tops, until the emergency ban list. Thankfully, full power Pepe only lasted 1 event at maximum power, so I mean, you'd be hard pressed to call 13 days a format. In late February 2016, Valens Letout, who won last year in Necros format with Burning Abyss, this year went and got 3rd place again with Burning Abyss. Yep, same guy, same deck, same city. In March 2016, the last major top of Burning Abyss before Infinite Gold was top 4 by Renell Williams, the only Burning Abyss player in top cut at YCS Vegas, playing the aforementioned Phantom Knights and also running 2 Horn of Heaven, 4 Solemns, and 3 Anti-Spell Fragrance. It was a full-blown anti-pendulum brew of Burning Abyss. And as mentioned, Burning Abyss having synergies and adaptations for almost 2 years now, proving how versatile the Swiss Army knife of a deck it could be, you know, because it could run lots of different floodgates. Anyway.
Chapter 9. Premium Gold, Infinite Gold. March 17th, 2016.
When Beatrice was imported to the TCG in March 2016, the collective Burning Abyss player base were set on fire. This also meant now that Gay Dante was relevant after being a binder warmer for so long. Beatrice could get her effect when she was Solemn Warninged, which many people learned the hard way what the difference between the terms possession and control is. Solemn Strike, while not that good against Burning Abyss, was still kind of annoying, but to have almost complete immunity against it if you summoned Beatrice was a huge bonus. Especially since Pilgrim Dante was a good card, it was just impossible to summon. Now, Beatrice could get it for free. You could crash her after you've used your 2 materials, or your opponent would just simply be forced to deal with it because they just didn't have a lot of destructive removal at the time. This card alone propelled Burning Abyss from a somewhat lackluster choice to the very center of the metagame again. This time, in a format against Pendulum, Monarchs, and Cosmo. Beatrice could send any card from your deck on your opponent's turn, like Farfa, Alich, and Shadal Dragon, and you could also send other cards to further your plays, like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, to search an out to Dark Destroyer, and even Skarm to search Tour Guide from the Underworld. It was around this time at ARG Detroit that the Burning Abyss community blew up again by combining Burning Abyss and Phantom Knights together to create the ridiculous mess that would annoyingly be known as PK Fire. While people had already played it before, like Renell Williams at Vegas, it was further popularized at this event. Despite the contradictions of having 2 different archetypes, the Phantom Knights were a 3-axis deck similar to Burning Abyss, and since Dante was generic needing just any level 3s, well, the Phantom Knights could be summoned to make Dante or Mild, get more advantage, and even search Fogblade. People initially scoffed at the idea of searching Fiendish Chain in 2016 because, you know, power creep, but a Fiendish Chain that's searchable, that could also be used as Monster Reborn for the grind game, it actually was pretty good. In April 2016 at YCS Houston, a few Burning Abyss players did manage to top, and the vast majority of them were running Phantom Knights and Terratops. And there was also a random Sky Scourge Burning Abyss deck in there too, piloted by Jesse Flores. Norleras BA was kind of a funny gimmick deck that even DZeef tried to make viable. It was a weird concoction that essentially would have Dark Fiends and a Light Fairy, like Beatrice, to help facilitate the summon of Norleras, looping both players and the whole field, but since your guys have graveyard effects, you would essentially be ahead. And I guess if you didn't draw away to Norleras, you were just playing PK Fire, which, as we've established, was just a good deck. As I said before, Burning Abyss could synergize with anything at all if you really try hard enough. After YCS Houston on April 11, 2016, the ban list dropped, banning much of the overpowered Pepe cards, but also furthering Draco Pal's destruction by limiting important combo pieces like Draco Face-Off and the main anti-Cosmo card, Ignister. For all intents and purposes, this basically made Draco Pal specifically unplayable. At least for now. Burning Abyss was also slightly boosted by upping Allure of Darkness to 2. Now I don't want Burning Abyss to get hit. I like Burning Abyss, clearly, but I will say it is almost conspiratorial how lenient Konami have been with the deck. I mean, they were letting this deck stick around for just over 2 seasons. That is a long time to not just be relevant, but a YCS capable winning deck. Remember, Shaddolls were dead, like dead. Clifford was inconsistent to be really relevant. Burning Abyss would get more tops during this year and this season cycle than it ever did in 2014. Admittedly, 2014, it started in August for Burning Abyss, but just to give you some context, even numerically, it was raking in the tops this entire year. Again, almost 2 years after its creation. And this was mostly down to Beatrice and the Phantom Knights.
Chapter 10, Shining Victories, May 5th, 2016.
This set greatly boosted the power of one of the 2 main rivals of Burning Abyss, Cosmo. Cosmo now had a lot of crazy first turn combos now, with nothing but a Fire King Island and any ship. But another more slept on Cosmo card until popularized later was a variant called Cosmo Demise. Yes, that Demise. You see, people thought Cosmo had to be a combo deck. It had to be special summoning ships, blowing them up, making a crazy board, but Card of Demise at 3 and Pot of Duality meant that all you had to do was draw Tin Can, some trap cards, and then summon all of your ships on your opponent's turn instead. By playing 3 Call of the Haunted and 3 Oasis Dragon Souls, suddenly, drawing 3 cards every turn was kind of worth the sacrifice of not being able to combo. So Cosmo players were split between which variant was the best, and both were really tough for Burning Abyss. Despite all the crazy stuff Cosmo could do, Burning Abyss was still able to put a kaiju over whatever they summoned and attack for low enough life points to win in time with Barbar and Nightmare Shark. As an absolute desperate play, you could also combine 2 Dantes to make F-Zero. No, not the Negate, the original material that during the battle phase steals an untargetable monster. Fire King Cosmo was the new cool way to play the deck, and it was definitely rising in popularity. But by siding System down, it really hurt the Demise version of the deck, so there was still some tools available. Now, an important card released in this set was Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, a card that could completely destroy your deck. If your opponent dropped this on you turn 1, you were completely screwed 90% of the time. But the thing is, after turn 1, if you didn't open it, it wasn't that good because you could still bring back Dante and rank it up into Beatrice. Now, despite how good this card was on paper, banishing all Dantes, at the end of May, Tamid Zaman picked up a format-defining win at YCS Providence. He piloted a PK Fire list that would go on to become the standard and staple build for months to come. Yeah, Burning Abyss is still winning YCSs almost 2 years after its release. This also main deck 3 copies of Twin Twisters, an also recently released card. Because of how good back row was getting, Domain of the Monarchs, Pendulum Scales, Twin Twisters discarding a BA was such a premium play to stop your opponent from bringing back Cosmo ships and hitting Solemn Strikes, while also using the graveyard effect of whatever you discard. In June, the following month, was YCS Origins. PK Fire took the victory again. Another YCS win for Burning Abyss. Here, we also got to see an interesting new take on the deck as well. Burning Abyss Monarchs was piloted by Darren Stevenson all the way to top 16. The deck could put up Burning Abyss cards on turn 1, milling either more BA cards or Pantheisms, and then you could set yourself up for Monarch plays on your opponent's turn. Again, I cannot express enough just how good BA was at being splashed into other decks. You had to anyway because of the limitations on Graph and Tour Guide. So players really did experiment and find creative ways to make the deck viable. For the national season of 2016, it felt like it was a payback situation of 2015. This time, instead of Necros being the meta and Burning Abyss being the meta call, the meta was now PK Fire, and the meta call was Domain Monarch, piloted by Eric Christensen to first place of the North American WCQ. Yes, that same Eric Christensen that won YCS Dallas with Infernoid. Domain, of course, a searchable Vanity's Emptiness, was a thorn in the side for Burning Abyss, and basically any deck, making it a pretty valid meta call, since at the time, most players were playing extra deck Monarchs, because the deck just had super good synergies with things like Brilliant Fusion. But why bother with all that when you can just slap together 3 structure decks, and then floodgate your opponent out with Domain? In Europe, Magispectors, a deck that cannot be destroyed or targeted, was victorious. And we also saw the rise of Oddeyes Performapal in Top Cut of Euros 2016 by Joshua Schmidt. He saw this meta of PK Fire as a chance to play a deck that ran 6 copies of Kirin. In hindsight, that Pendulum deck was unwinnable for Burning Abyss. Sky Iris provided untargetable scales, as well as Kirin. Once that hit the board, it was game over. The deck could also search Oddeyes Fusion, which could summon Oddeyes Vortex Dragon going second for free, protect your scales, bounce your Beatrice, and then negate your cards. Burning Abyss players at the time were very lucky this deck was not well known, and was only really kind of under wraps for Team Complexity card gaming at the time. Oh, and also this one idiot came second at UK Nationals with Pure BA. Pure, by the way, not PK Fire. Oh my god, are we almost done? Fuck me, it's been an hour.
Chapter 11, The Dark Illusion, August 4th, 2016.
Dark Illusion brought out Pot of Desires as probably the only noteworthy card for Burning Abyss, but it was a powerful card nonetheless. Many argued that banishing your one-of Takatomborg, Tour Guide, Graph, or Seer was not worth running. Despite this, many Burning Abyss decks topped and had been successful with it throughout the format. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players back then really just didn't understand how good drawing 2 cards was, even if it meant sacrificing 10 random cards off the top. Because even if you do hit your one-of Seer or other pieces, PK Fire just had so many tools available to it now, especially with Beatrice, that having that early card advantage was just worth it. Dark Illusion also saw the introduction of Metalfoes and Paleozoic. At YCS Toronto 2016, there were still numerous Burning Abyss tops, and quite a few of them were deep top cut finishes like Calvin Tahan in top 16. In top 8, there was Patrick James, and of course, the winner of this whole event was Boden Temnik, running, you guessed it, Burning Abyss. As a note, about half of the Burning Abyss tops ran Pot of Desires. This was a solid performance for a deck contending with 3 Kirin in the format, by the way. For some reason, people didn't really catch on to that Oddeyes deck. On August 29th, for a ban list to occur in 2016, exactly 2 years after the first Burning Abyss cards were printed, you would expect Konami to obliterate the deck. Finally, a year after its original arch nemesis Shaddoll was destroyed. But basically nothing. Somehow, some way, some inside job type of reasoning, Burning Abyss survived. Again, another ban list. For a lot of players, this was getting genuinely frustrating. How is it that this deck just will not die? The community either loved this or hated it, as you can imagine, and it became a really divisive part of the discourse. Now, it's not like Burning Abyss was dominating this period of time. No, but it was winning major events. Winning. 2 years after its release. No one can really explain why Burning Abyss was allowed to survive for so long. You can imagine just how salty this made ex-Shaddoll players. Why did their deck have to die, but Burning Abyss got stronger somehow? Burning Abyss got more tops in 2016 than it did in 2014. Why is Konami letting this deck thrive and be good, yet Shaddolls must lose their equivalent of Dante with the banning of Construct? To some, this was double standards, and people were not happy with the blind eye Konami kept turning towards Burning Abyss. Monarchs and the blood-boiling, annoying Stormforth were hit, along with Dark Destroyer. Burning Abyss, of course, did take a hit as well, but nowhere near a severe one. Beatrice to 1. A cosmetic hit. A single Beatrice was still functional, and Seer being limited to 1 made no difference to it being at 2, since the Seer loop was still there. Allure even got bumped to 3, meaning you had even more ways to cycle dead Phantom Knights out of your hand. This ban list kind of took away some longevity by limiting your Beatrice, but you only needed 1, and Burning Abyss somehow got more consistent with the third Allure. The following 2 YCSs, Minneapolis and Mexico City, were won by metal foes, almost unsurprisingly because even though Kirin was limited to one as well, it was still accompanied by 3 Bumbuku. These events saw a very diverse mix in the meta, perhaps the most diverse meta Burning Abyss has ever participated in. There were all kinds of decks topping these events. Blue Eyes, Metal Foes, Magispectors, Infernoid, Mermel, and Lightsworn. Burning Abyss was still in the metagame.
Chapter 12, Structure Deck Seto Kaiba and Invasion Vengeance, October 20th, 2016.
On October 20th, 2016, ABC was introduced. Buster Dragon proved to be another painful boss monster that Burning Abyss had to deal with, but it was not a challenge that Burning Abyss had never seen before. From Winda, to Unicorn, to Cliffort Towers, to Dart Destroyer, and now Buster Dragon, Dante did find ways to deal with all of them. And a week later, Thomas Rose found a way to overcome that challenge by winning YCS Liverpool 2016 with Burning fucking Abyss. It would appear that Burning Abyss has this weird and stupid habit of winning events it has no business even making top cut in. But here we are. Thomas Rose played cards specifically designed to destroy ABC, like Triple Chaos Hunter, Triple Ghost Reaper, yeah, and maybe a Floodgate like Vanity's Fiend. On November 3rd, 2016, the power of the new decks grew. Metal Foes received such support as Alcahest. This would be a quick play steal effect, which as you can imagine, anything non-graveyard related for Burning Abyss is going to be annoying. Paleozoics also became mixed together with Frogs to create a stun deck that even Dante would be impressed with. But above all, we saw one of the strongest trap cards ever printed. Dimensional Barrier. It was one thing to deal with Kirin, Toad, and Blue Eyes monsters that can't be targeted or destroyed, but to not be able to play your deck was a whole other story. Of course, Dimensional Barrier affected everyone in every deck, but it was just yet another problem to deal with while playing Burning Abyss. But while the triangle of Paleo, Metal Foes, and ABC was going and raging at full power, at YCS Bochum in 2016, Burning Abyss was piloted yet again to a top 16 finish by Fotis Papadolakis. The resilience of Burning Abyss must be commended, for no matter how many times Dante was knocked down, somehow, someway, there was a way to keep topping events there was no business topping.
Chapter 13, Raging Tempest, February 9th, 2017.
Raging Tempest saw the introduction of yet another contender for possible best deck of all time. Burning Abyss has had to live through the new best deck of all time every year since its creation. Near the end of February at YCS Seattle, a 60-card Burning Abyss deck managed to make top cut in Zoo format. It ran 60 cards, That Grass Looks Greener, a Fairy Tale Snow to send with Beatrice, and 3 Vanity's Fiends, with pretty much the maximum number of copies of every Burning Abyss ever printed. And then, in the following month at YCS Atlanta, in March 2017, Tyler Allen piloted Burning Abyss Shaddoll Zodiac to top 32. Almost poetically, Burning Abyss was played alongside Shaddoll yet again. This time, used for making things like Shekanaga or Winda because Shaddoll Fusion is just such a sick going second card. Zodiac was so dominant and so powerful, it took 32 out of 32 top cut spots for one of the YCSs during this period. And then, later that year, we got Master Rule 4. Let me just play the original clip for you.
Master Rule 4. For all intents and purposes, the nail in the coffin of Burning Abyss. The deck, at the premier event level, may just be completely done and dusted forever.
Yeah, that's what the original documentary said. Oh my god, I have never been so fucking wrong about anything ever, have I? I notoriously have very good takes that never age badly.
Chapter 14, The Firewall Era, 2018.
Not much has changed since 2017. With the 2018 meta being ran over with absolutely insane decks from Spiral through to Pend FTK or True Draco with Masterpiece, all the way to Striker, Goki, Dark World FTK, and Dante's new emesis, Altergeist Sequoitus. Yeah, they just reprinted Kirin. It's no surprise that Burning Abyss did basically nothing for this period. Sure, it may have managed a sporadic top here and there, but it could be attributed to luck and persistence of pet deckers and not really the power of BA itself. Remember, BA was a meta deck for 3 years. It created a massive following and community. A lot of those players since quit the game. Some of you watching this now might have been like 12 years old at the time and won't really be familiar with the community, the culture, the fan base that Duelist Alliance created. For me personally and others likewise, Duelist Alliance to Master Rule 4 was the golden age of Yu-Gi-Oh! We saw a huge array of different types of win conditions, strategies, mostly interactive games, with some of the most iconic themes ever. This was a period in time where Blue Eyes won worlds, where social media boomed, and deck profiles, combo guides, Facebook archetypes groups grew, and the NA-EU divide crossed over between players as we all became more interconnected as a community. That period of time, Yu-Gi-Oh! Grew like never before, and so for a lot of older duelists like myself, it was the best it would get. With the release of Flames of Destruction on May 4th, 2018, Burning Abyss got new extra deck tools their monsters could actually be used for in Nightmares. But it also got one of the most powerful spell cards ever made, Sekka's Light. That card was so good. Not only did it let you draw 2 cards, it also let you mulligan back a monster. You could put back things like Takatomborg or Libich. It came at the cost of not being able to activate any other spells or traps during the whole duel, but it didn't matter for Burning Abyss, a deck that could be built entirely with just monster cards like Gallus and Dangers. And so, since the legacy of the Burning Abyss video originally ended, Thomas Rose rekindled hope for the BA fanbase. A year later, in 2018, at the United Kingdom's National Championship, in a field of Goki and Sky Striker, Thomas Rose won the entire event with Burning Abyss. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody could have imagined that in Link format, that Burning Abyss could thrive. Remember, this was the pre-2020 Master Rules, meaning you could only summon an extra deck monster into the extra monster zone. Some of you might not know this if you only started playing recently, but between 2017 and 2020, you could only have one extra deck monster on the field, or an extra deck monster in a Link zone created by a Link monster. Basically, everything had to follow the Link rules. So naturally, that's why the original Legacy video ended so dramatically and abruptly. Because why would Burning Abyss ever be able to compete in an ever-growing power-crept meta with things like Electromite and Firewall, if we could even just control one Beatrice? Somehow, despite this, Thomas Rose utilized Rescue Cat to make Naturia Beast with Gallus, and also ran Blackluster Soldier, a tech card that sometimes saw play in Burning Abyss in like 2014. Watching that deck win was insane, and it was all that was needed for BA to be looked at again for a short period of time. We then went on to get 4 Burning Abyss top cut spots at the European WCQ, and somehow it managed to win the 200th YCS in Mexico City at the hands of Andres Torres, and it finished 2nd place at the same weekend at YCS Utrecht with the help of Dinka Bui. While Torres' build was more in line of what was played before, utilizing BLS and Gallus, it also played Destiny hero Malicious and Fabled Solkius to try and hard summon Beatrice. Dinka Bui's list, however, was ridiculous. He decided to play a deck with a card that had seen no play up until now, Orbital Hydralander, and he made it look like the best deck in the room. You could essentially always make Hydralander live by maxing out on only the best names and Rhino Warriors, while also manipulating the graveyard with Fairy Tail Snow. Thanks to the main deck Kaijus, the deck actually had a pretty good matchup versus Sky Striker. And somehow the deck only got better for a short while with the release of Thunder Dragons in Soul Fusion on October 9th, 2018. Pure Thunder Dragon, it was quite favorable for BA, since Colossus didn't do anything to Burning Abyss and you could kill through most boards with the constant link climbing with things like Malicious, as well as Farfa getting rid of the indestructible monsters. And so, Burning Abyss managed to rack up 11 YCS tops and 4 EU WCQ tops in 2018 before Fairy Tail Snow was banned in January 2019. 4 years later, 4 years after the deck was made, Burning Abyss was still putting up double-digit tops in a season. This was one of the strangest, most unique phenomena in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think this streak of topping a major event this often and for this long has never been replicated. And so, this is why Burning Abyss, until day, has such a dedicated fan base.
Chapter 15, Block Burning Abyss, 2019.
From here, it is really scraping the bottom of the barrel, unfortunately. With no snow, the deck was barely playable, and only managing 1 top cut spot that year at YCS Sydney, and that was pre-snow ban, using a similar list as before with hand traps and just the other Monster Mash style of link climbing. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the final ever Tier 2 Plus Premier Event top for Burning Abyss. People tried to switch up to some heavy combo versions using Block Dragon, ending on Fossil Dyna, and the deck continued to live on this full support of Copium. Despite this, it never managed to get a top. The closest it got was YCS Chicago in 2019, placing 35th. In May, Dark Neostorm finally imported Cherubini, Ebon Angel of the Burning Abyss. Let me just play the original clip from the original Legacy video because I think this is amusing.
Until Konami prints a Burning Abyss Link monster or a generic Link monster with a fiendish Rhino style effect, we can safely assume that with Master Rule 4, Dante has died.
It's like word for word the text of what would end up becoming Cherubini. Despite this, it wasn't enough. Block BA was at its peak. Despite ending on 4 negates and 2 floodgates, it didn't get a premier event top. It could have been considered fun to play, but it just couldn't outpace Orcust or the newer combo versions of Thunder Dragons. It also suffered once again from Abyss Dweller being played by Salamangreat, and all of the other types of graveyard hate that was originally directed at Orcust, with Burning Abyss taking Crossfire.
Chapter 16. The COVID Era.
The COVID era was a strange time in general for Yu-Gi-Oh! Not just the meta, but because of remote duels, where we had to use our webcams to participate in anything close to an official event. During lockdown, we had Phantom Rage, a set which saw the release of Divine Arsenal Zeus. This card required an Xyz to rank up into after it battles, and not once per turn, could detach 2 cards to send all cards on the field to the grave. Until today, Zeus might just be the best BA card. This was the biggest support card since Hydrolander. In fact, among the BA community, we sometimes refer to BA as a Zeus turbo deck, using a BA engine. Being able to make a Dante attack something in defense, rank up into Downerd, and then getting Zeus's effect off twice to hopefully dodge an Imperm or Veiler, and even provided that the Dante was made with the right materials, you could still do all of that and end on a Beatrice. A lot obviously has to go right in order to do this best case scenario play, but overlaying 2 BA names and making a Fortune Tune, which until today jump scares players because it cannot be targeted or destroyed, makes shotgunning into Zeus for main phase 2 a bit of a gotcha moment for the deck. While Zeus was an incredibly powerful card for Burning Abyss, it just wasn't enough to give this deck too much relevant recognition, especially with COVID shutting down events. In 2021, Gabe Vargas, National Champion of North America 2018, managed to get first place at a remote duel extravaganza, which is kind of like a small regional. While this is a complete shadow of an achievement compared to the original power of Burning Abyss, we really were going to take whatever we could get at this point. This deck was sadly still being played almost in the same way it was in 2018, except worse because there was no snow. Ice Dragon's Prison was a super powerful trap card included that came out in a year prior in Rise of the Duelist before Zeus. Naturally, that worked well. We also got Predaplant Verte Anaconda. By sending Red Eye's Fusion to summon Red Eye's Dark Dragoon was a huge go-to in the community, spawning such classics as Make Verte. Because if your opponent stops anything you do with your hand traps or other layer formed of interruption, you could always just put 2 BAs into Verte. And of course, the best turn 1 combo, which just needed any combination of Graph Seer or Tour Guide, meant you could end on Dragoon plus Beatrice. Put this together with the Dinomicious and a Solemn Strike, not a lot of decks were able to break this. It was fine. Burning Abyss definitely remained a playable rogue deck at an absolute stretch, but sadly, ever since Koji Yajima's top 8 finish at YCS Sydney 2019 in January, this was the last recorded premier event top. Burning Abyss has never recovered. Despite its short stint in 2018, it hasn't been near playable until maybe Transaction Rollback today, which, again, rogue deck at best.
Chapter 17. Present Day and Beyond.
After dodging multiple deserved banlist hits during its peak, one thing that's all but inevitable will be the banning of Beatrice. Somehow Dante survived 2015, 16, and even the resurgence in 2018, but with the recent release of Fiendsmith, a 1-card rank 6 Beatrice that allows you to make her without your normal summon and use the effect immediately, the whole community sees her days as numbered. Ironically, summoning Beatrice with the Burning Abyss method is actually more fair than summoning it hard today. If we're very lucky, Beatrice will receive an errata to essentially reverse her summoning condition, meaning that you can't use it on the turn you hard summon it, but you can if you summon it with a BA. that could potentially be a buff for the deck. In terms of the future, Burning Abyss is not out of the realm of being a meta deck again. At its absolute core, the monsters themselves still hold up somewhat decently until today. They're still very good at swarming the field, the deck can easily access Zeus, and they offer good tempo and disruption. The problem is that I think Burning Abyss needs an end board. Relying on GOAT format discard traps and a singular Farfa banish with Beatrice isn't good enough anymore. Perhaps we'll get a Burning Abyss circular that can summon itself from hand by sending Graph from deck for cost, and also has a graveyard effect to immediately search Fire Lake. Perhaps an upgraded Dante is very much needed. We really need a better go-to rank 3 monster. Personally, I've even dreamed up a Link 1 that requires Dante as a material, kind of like Infernoble Charles, which would mean allowing you to immediately summon Beatrice with Seer target Dante, Dante target Seer, and then maybe lets you send the card from deck, or search a BA card, or just do what every other boss monster does in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Let it negate by also milling a BA or something. Or all of the above. You see, we've seen historically just how good legacy decks can suddenly become meta with the right support cards. Melodious, Unchained, and Super Heavy Samurai, all decks which are pretty old at this point, and then immediately became meta with the right support cards without abandoning the original cards. Kind of like how Notorious support kind of did. Over 1,600 days of meta relevance, 5 years of meta dominance, or at least topping a YCS, Burning Abyss truly is an incredible deck. Burning Abyss deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame for Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. Being a dominant metaphor since its release, appearing multiple times in and out of formats for years, amalgamating itself with different engines, archetypes, playstyles, and even through Master Rule 4, taking multiple top cut spots during a period where Pendulum FTK, Danger FTK, and Firewall Dragon, some of the most broken days of Yu-Gi-Oh!, that is nothing short of a monumental success for a deck that was 4 years old by that point. Burning Abyss has 191 premier event tops spanning 5 years. Today, as you end this video, it's been 10 years. The second half of this decade has been slow to say the least for Burning Abyss, but you never know in Yu-Gi-Oh! We could just be 1 or 2 support cards away from another Burning Abyss meta.
PM me when you get Minerva, Jobin.